Question Lane is a podcast where the goal is to solve problems through the process of questions and answers. Today's guest is a diversity training consultant and also a leadership studies professor at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Today's series of questions and answers will be centered on Area 4, labor, specifically her workplace bullying and colorism study. Our guest today is Dr. Leah Hollis. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. What would you like to be referred to as, Dr. Hollis, Leah?
Leah is fine for the interview.
Perfect. We'll go with that. So for people that may be unfamiliar with you, are you a black woman?
Yes, I am.
As a black woman, do you face any challenges when presenting suggestions to companies that may consult you on diversity issues?
How do you mean? If you could rephrase that.
What I mean specifically is when you consult and give advice on how to make the workplace more equal or constructive or more effective, do you receive any pushback that may be seen as, I'm receiving racism from them, or is that something that you've never received before?
Actually, it presents itself in another way. When somebody reaches out to me to visit their institution or company, the person recruiting me is always very gracious. That part isn't a concern. What I have found out is that the mechanisms underneath it, so when I sign on as a minority-owned business or minority women-owned business, sometimes it's accounts payable that misplaces things, is not diligent, doesn't take it as seriously. So the front end, I don't receive pushback while they are recruiting me. It is the nuts and bolts of processing timely requests to engage me that sometimes get in the way.
That's interesting. Interesting. So why did you decide to focus on studying and suggesting ways to create a healthier workplace?
Well, both of my parents, I would say, were civil rights leaders. My father was superintendent of schools in Johnstown, Pennsylvania at the time of his passing, which was some time ago, but he was recruited to Johnstown to help desegregate the schools. Both of my parents were advisors of the Pennsylvania Human Rights Commission, the PHRC, which at its time and in its heyday was a very powerful civil rights watchdog. My mother was the affirmative action officer at the University of Pittsburgh, Johnstown, and she was brought on by then President Frank Blackington to deal with the new legislation in sexual harassment and also to diversify the campus. So perhaps I am just following in their footsteps in believing that everybody should have a healthy workplace. Everybody should be able to be productive and have the right to self-determination instead of being harassed by, for whatever reason, whether it's race, gender, an insecure boss, an inept institution, what have you. We spend more waking time on our jobs than with our loved ones, and I believe that time we spend away from our loved ones should be healthy times and healthy experiences.
Thanks for elaborating, but I also want to see, if it's possible, did you have any conversations with your parents about integration and its effects, and did they have any thoughts on that at all?
We didn't talk about it. I really just witnessed their behavior growing up. So my father would make his rounds on the weekend, and as a superintendent, he would go to different teachers' homes, and he would visit with them, and I'm a little kid, but he brought me along, so I heard him talk about that. Not that we had some soiree around the dinner table and discussed integration. They did it, and I watched. The same thing with my mother. There were several things that she just did. She was one of the first black teachers at a couple of school districts in the greater Johnstown area, and she just did it. So I didn't talk with her as a child about what she was doing. I just watched her do it and did the same thing. It's a lot of modeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just curious because it sounds like you follow right in their footsteps, and you're like a second generation diversity consultant, that type of career path. It's almost reminded me of someone that had a basketball player as a father, and they themselves also went into playing basketball. That's what it reminded me of. So I just was curious about that.
That's a fair assessment, sure.
So I'm gonna, before I get into the paper, I want to get into some definitions. Because to quote the late great Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she said that words are very important, and I definitely agree with that sentiment. So when we talk about diversity training, what exactly is diversity training?
Wow. I do recall when I was coming out of college, diversity was about black and white. And even then, I was concerned that the definition of diversity was black and white. Diversity is about different people coming together, whether it's black, white, Asian, Latinx, language minority, disability. Even I'm talking to you right now from the state of Pennsylvania. And so regional conversations about the Steelers and the Eagles. I mean, people can get real wound up about their sports teams. So diversity is about accepting and embracing those who are different from you and appreciating the contributions those different people bring to the workplace.
So just to be clear, if you have a workplace of 100 people and there 90 of the 100 people are white, and the other 5 of the remaining 10 are Hispanic, and the other 5 are, let's say, Indian women of Indian descent with no black people, would that be considered a diverse workplace?
So if you're talking about the proportions of people and their demographic markers, I would probably suggest that institution needs more differences amongst its staff, if we want to look at it that way as far as numbers. And the reason I say that is diverse groups are more innovative. Diverse groups have different perspectives and don't make the same mistakes that a homogenous group might make. So, for example, several years ago, there was a car that came out called the Nova. Well, that's cute in English, but Nova in Spanish means no go. So you just named the car No Go, and it was, gee, if they had a more diverse staff, they would have figured that out. But I would also make the argument that just because you have 90% Caucasian, you're going to have diversity in that group. You'll have diversity along class lines. You'll have diversity among ethnicities. Just like the word black does not properly define who we are in the diaspora, given the multiple of origins we come from in Africa and the West Indies and all of that. But the same, unquote, white people don't all come from a white land. They come from Poland and Italy and Denmark and Sweden. So there still would be an argument for diversity training even amongst a group that is all identifying as Caucasian, because there's diversity within that group as well.
That's an interesting take. Your example of the Nova car kind of reminded me of the Gucci situation that occurred maybe about a year ago, where they released a blackface, I think, hoodie or something like that, or a sweatshirt. And there was conversations about if they had a more diverse design staff or product development staff, then maybe they would have caught the potential for offensiveness to people that are classified as black. But yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that. So another definition I want to get into is bullying. What does bullying mean in the workplace?
When somebody with more power engages in negative social acts, putting the target in an inferior position that affects that target's work, health, and emotional status. That is a definition that I use often. It's from Irison, University of Bergen in Sweden. The Scandinavians have led the way in studying workplace bullying. What I have found further is that women and people of color, because they tend to reside in the less powerful positions in an institution, are more likely to face workplace bullying.
So it sounds like a skewed power dynamic where someone actually mistreats that person because they're in a superior position.
Yep.
Perfect. And the last one I want to get into is colorism. What does colorism mean?
When somebody is prejudged, treated poorly, or even treated better because of the color of their skin. Colorism, in the article that the findings that you read, I was looking at colorism within the Black African American community. However, colorism is a thing in Asian communities, Hispanic, Latin communities, and Indian communities. It is a thing globally.
You are jumping ahead because I had a question about that. I was coming your way with that question to say, hey, was this study only about African Americans, or were Brazilians and South Africans? And you jumped right ahead. That's good. I'm glad you clarified on that. So the sample size. I'm going to jump into the findings here. So the sample size, there was 158 people in the study. Were these Black Americans, or were these people also included that have like Caribbean or African ancestry?
I did not drill down and so I'll clarify a term. African American would be somebody who was in the diaspora, who was born here and raised here in an American culture. Black, I use that term to represent all of the diaspora. So it could be, if I say a Black community, I'm including Africans, I'm including Caribbean, I'm including anybody who has a bloodline to Africa but not necessarily raised in America. So to answer your question, I did not qualify that sample to see if there are people from other parts of the diaspora. I just went after the Black community. If that makes sense.
Understood. Also, 76.73% of the women and men that were sampled in this study were above 40. Was there any intentionality in that, or was that just the luck of the draw?
Just how it happened.
Understood. Another slide that in the paper was color as a protected class. Can you briefly explain what that means?
Sure. 1964 civil rights laws named a number of protected classes: race, gender, religion, national origin, and color. But color, though it is a protected class under the 1964 civil rights legislations, color and colorism is typically lumped in to racism, even though they can be different things.
Yeah, because when I was, reviewing the research, I was thinking to myself, not that it should be, because I'm a darker male, but I'm not advocating this. I'm just from a logical perspective. Do you think it would make sense for black people that are dark skinned, I guess, to be a class unto themselves, since there's so much of a difference in treatment?
Well, technically, it is, but colorism, just like let's say sexism or racism, it doesn't say you're protected because you're a woman. It says you can't be discriminated against because of your gender. So there are some primarily female institutions that may discriminate against men. There are potentially black organizations that may discriminate against somebody who's Hispanic. So when we talk about color, I wouldn't say that being of a darker complexion is essentially its own class. It is instead written in such a way that if one were to face discrimination because of color, maybe because they're lighter, maybe because they're darker, what have you, and in the black community it swings both ways. All kinds of families have all kinds of issues around the one person who is lighter than everybody else feeling the brunt, or the one person who's darker who's feeling the brunt. So I wouldn't say being dark complected is a protected class in and of itself. I would say that discrimination because of color is how the rules are laid out.
Yeah, and I'm mainly speaking to, because I see different arguments online about the way that, let's say, for example, a black woman is mistreated in the workplace, and then somebody might be interviewed as an expert on TV, and they're like someone that has a white parent or an Asian parent, and and it's like, is that a true representation of what a black person is and how they're mistreated in the workplace? That's what I meant by that.
Okay. Well, what you're discussing, there's a bloodline question which you have laid out because your lineage might be of mixed heritage versus how that person was acculturated. So there are some folks, let's look at Malcolm X. He would be considered on the lighter end of the scale. But there is no question Malcolm X is black. He was acculturated. His lessons, what he believed and how he advocated was for blacks and African Americans. We have also seen black scholars, I won't name them or call anybody out, who make arguments against African Americans and blacks, and it could be because of the way they were acculturated and taught to disavow the black community. So there's a difference between somebody who shows up with a mixed lineage, and they might happen to have a Chinese parent or a white parent or what have you, versus how they adopt ideologies and philosophies about promoting African Americans in the workplace. Does that make sense how I'm putting it?
Yeah, it's a mentality. It's a mentality to progress black people in general, as opposed to just a skin color specifically.
Right.
Okay. And you also talked about the advancement of employment statuses of darker skinned people compared to lighter skinned people. Who do you think is most responsible for that? Like for example, if a dark skinned person is not getting a raise or a promotion, who's more responsible, that lighter skinned person or the manager who's in charge of those promotions or raises?
I guess I didn't assign a who's more responsible, because colorism in the black community, you said that, there we go. Colorism in the black community comes after 400 years of mistreatment. I'm going back to slavery, racial mixing, and the privileging that white slave owners had for their mixed lineage children. That is baked into the culture. It just is. The open-ended comments from the study that we're discussing, both light and dark complected people would comment, I know I got promoted because I'm lighter. I know that because I'm darker and have 2 master's degrees, I got passed over again. I know my boss gets along well with the executives because he's lighter and he told me so. So the other thing about, not absolutely, but with colorism, the colorism is an expression of that mixed lineage, which also comes out in the features of the nose and the mouth and the texture of your hair. And it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that some states are barring discrimination against natural hair. I mean, when I started at the workplace, you could not wear I could not wear my natural hair to work. It was permed, it was a wig, it was something, and it's just in the last, and I've been working since in the middle 90s. So colorism also brings along with it more European features, more European grades of hair, and all of those things play into some people who have those features being more readily accepted by a Eurocentric society.
You're alluding to hair penalties. There's a research paper that I'm reading about that now, where black women in the workplace are facing mistreatment because of those natural hair. The choices to do that. So you spoke about this a few minutes ago about the historical perspective of the quote-unquote race mixing and black people being lighter skinned. Can you speak to the educational attainment and the kind of gap that created over time?
Sure. Spelman College and Morehouse College, respectfully, were both designed to be colleges for the children of mixed lineage from slave owners. There is a wonderful book out by Bobby Lovett that looks at HBCUs from their inception to 2009. And in that book, he outlines that education at HBCUs was designed for one of 2 things, either A, by rich philanthropists like the Mellons and the Rockefellers to train labor, or B, no, there's 3. B, it could be a religious offshoot, or C, to train the children of mixed lineage from slave owners. That preference meant that those with lighter complexions were afforded the opportunities earlier than darker complected folks to read, to learn, to reason, to count, and therefore put them in better positions to get jobs. So it is a long-standing thing that has happened since slavery, and in some ways continues. If we look at some of those older pictures of black wealth, and we talk about what we do to ourselves in the black community, the paper bag test, the vein test, like you turn over your arms, if you can see your veins, you're light enough, and if not, you're too dark. Even those crazy phrases, that's why it's called brown and bullied around. You know, we've heard those phrases about, if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, stay back. All of those things are in our own communities and an offshoot of that very painful slavery history.
You beat me to it again. I was just going to ask you about the brown paper bag test. Where did that come from?
That's some arbitrary test that we as a community unfortunately came up with to separate us by color. It is a divisive thing that was bred into us by a Eurocentric society that granted privilege and power to those with Eurocentric features. And so we devised those tests to create some internal divisiveness to privilege one over the other, hence the colorism.
Understood. I'm not sure if you would know this or not, but I just found it interesting when I was looking at the different names for complexions. Do you know how that came about? Because some of these colors are like food references, and I found it interesting.
I have no idea where those come from. I could probably look it up. There are several different color bands and scales, just like with hair. If you're studying hair, there's all kinds of A, B, C curl patterns. I'll be honest, I picked that one because there were 5, and a Likert scale is easier to work with instead of something that had 9 or 10 different color bands. So that was more of a research choice to go after a color spread of 5, and I am not sure how they came up with those names.
Yeah, because I was looking at one of them. One of them was called fawn, and I had to Google what was fawn, and it says that it's alluding to lighter skin. And I also looked at another definition for the word fawn, and that means to excessively flatter someone. So I was thinking,
interesting. I think of fawn as a deer.
That's a third definition. And when I was looking at the word fawn and how it can have these different definitions, I was thinking about the word fair as well. Fair is considered just, legitimate, or correct, but also it's a metaphor, or not a metaphor, but a definition for being light-skinned. So do you have any thoughts on that?
That one you've caught me on. I do not know where those terms came from. I was surprised at them. I mean, russet is one, and I think of russet potatoes. And then there's another one that's like apricot white, but I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, apricots are orange. So I kind of played past the colors and just used them as markers for the study. I do not know who dreamed up the names of the color bands.
Holy smokes. Okay, got it.
That's a great question, though.
So this study, is there like a paper or a specific article that this is going to be kind of like written up about in the future? Or?
Yeah. Yes. In the slides, I don't have the name of it off the top of my head. It is a book chapter in an edited volume that is coming out later this year. So I was asked to write about colorism, and since I do workplace bullying and I know it's a thing, I mean, even in my growing up, I've seen it, I've experienced it. I said, let me do this study on colorism and bullying. But yes, it will be, it is in press now as a book chapter. And in the slides, I believe I referenced the exact name and the publisher of that book that is forthcoming.
Okay, perfect, because I would definitely be interested in reading it in its totality. So what are some suggestions that you have for countering bullying in the workplace?
Well, there's 2 different perspectives. If you are the leader, if you are in the power position, leaders need to recognize that the workplace models their behavior. And I just gave a lecture out at Compton College, and I stated, we know this. If you're the leader, if you're the boss, and you show up an hour late to work every day, you better believe it, your employees are showing up 45 minutes late. They're going to see it's okay to come late because you do it. It's a social psychology kind of thing. So if you as a leader are a bully, you enable bullying, you're apathetic to bullying. And I actually have an article that came out last year on this. It's called Lessons from the Bobo Doll Experiment. It's based on Bandura's experiments on social psychology. The leader needs to know they set the tone, and if they do nothing, it'll get worse, and it will cost them in turnover costs, in reputation, in employee disengagement. Some of the studies I've done, in fact, I'm working on a piece now, anywhere from $7,200 to $9,100 per year per person who was bullied, because the average person spends about 4 hours a week ruminating and disengaged when dealing with the bully. So all that time, they're sitting there not doing the institution's work. They're trying to figure out how to deal with the abusive bully. So leaders need to understand that it is a costly practice, it is a damaging practice, and it's the leader who needs to step in and mitigate those issues. If you're the target, if you're the person being bullied, you have a couple choices. You can certainly document what is happening to others who may be bullied. Consider your career options. Is this job worth staying? Is this job, should I leave? How's it affecting my health? People who face workplace bullying have panic attacks, depression, insomnia, weight swings. These are all clinical findings about what happens to somebody who works in a hostile environment. So depending on what position you are in that organization and how much power you have, determines how somebody should react to workplace bullying, and also what their temperament is, if you're the target, to moving or withstanding it or even fighting it internally.
So it sounds like, if you're a target of the bullying, you should, make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated. Think about other career options, or, think about ways of addressing it directly through journaling. If you are the actual bully, you just think about it from a more efficiency and turnover and more of a quantitative loss to the company perspective. What about HR? What do you think about HR's role in this type of bullying situation?
So now you've gotten ahead of me. That's great. I'm actually working on a book right now with Routledge Publishers, looking at HR and bullying. Everybody loves to blame HR. But keep in mind, HR typically is reporting to a vice president. The director of HR is still in a middle position. And most of the findings are saying, at least the open-ended comments from the study, I still have to write it up, bullying just isn't a priority. So if the vice president, here we go again with the leader, does not set it as a priority by developing a policy, enforcing the policy, and charging HR to follow up on it, it's not addressed. And HR, they know where the bullies are. Most places I visit, everybody knows who the bully is, what they've done, how many people have left. It's no secret what is going on. It's just the institution has decided not to follow up on it. So HR is interestingly caught in the middle. They are not the demons or the devils, or so to speak. They need to be charged by the head of their division to make it a priority.
And just to kind of speak to, I guess, how a listener might receive this information during our interview, what if you're a person who you're not getting bullied yourself, and you're not the bully, but you're like a team member? What do you think that they should do if they see someone else getting bullied? What would your suggestions be in that case?
Depends. Two choices. The easy answer is the bystander should step in. That's easy. However, the bystander then risks becoming a target themselves. So I have a hard time saying the bystander should just jump right in because now they put a target on their back as well. However, a group of bystanders, let's suppose you have a department of 35 people and there are 2 or 3 people who are being bullied. So you've got 32 bystanders. Even if you got 15 of those bystanders to come forward and all show what is going on, they have more of a likelihood to get that behavior taken care of. So one bystander, that's tough. A group of bystanders, a group of people who step forward to say this needs to end, much more powerful.
Interesting. Thank God I'm not in that position where I've been bullied, and I've never bullied anyone. And like I said, thankfully, you know, I'm on an entrepreneurial kick right now. But
that's what I get that.
But I have been in situations where I was in that third position I referenced earlier, where I've seen other people getting bullied, and I didn't know what to do. And after speaking with some mentors, they gave me some constructive things that I could do that doesn't necessarily put a target on my back, but also calls out the bullying. And I want to see what you have to say about some of these suggestions. The first suggestion would be to follow up on any verbal or insultive language that is used against someone in an email or IM messenger app. So if someone is being bullied and they are getting called names, just say, hey, is this correct language that should be used in the workplace? Or I didn't like the way you said this. Why did you say that? And then if they respond, then you have a record of that. The second suggestion that I heard was to focus on your employee handbook or your corporate manual and address things from that perspective. Treat that as your constitution as you're working. You always reference your rights from that corporate handbook first. And then the third thing would be to, when someone is getting bullied and it's a group setting and someone says, hey, this guy comes in late, they don't know what they're doing, we should fire them. What do you think? Your response should be something to the degree of, what can we do to help them? And that usually slows things down. At least in my case, it slows things down. So what do you think about those 3 suggestions?
I'll tackle the last one first. I've been in that situation where, except I was in head of a department at the time, and somebody came to me and says, so-and-so has screwed up, you got to fire him. And then I took on the other thing that you mentioned. I went to the handbook and I said, we all know how this works. You need a verbal with the promise of a written with the promise of suspension, and then termination. There are 5 steps here. Now, that institution also had a very together HR process, and they actually followed their rules. And so even though the employee who was up for discussion, hey, we're going to get rid of him, and they were gunning for him anyway, I was like, but you didn't follow your rules. If I look in this person's personnel file, there is nothing in there to justify me jumping from no warning to fire them now. And the guy asking me to do the firing said, you're right. I was like, now, if you want to start creating a paper trail, if you want this to be the first instance, that's fine. But you all didn't do your due diligence before I got here to take him out. So now, also, I was in a leadership position, and I could make that call. And the person did get a write-up, and the person actually is still working there. Sending an email and confronting a boss in an email depends on your relationship with the bully. If you are somewhat good friends or at least collegial and you write them privately, that could work. If you write them publicly, like do a group email, say, hey, was that really necessary? That's the same behavior that targets hate. like the reply all and being admonished in a group email. So I would shy away from that one. You had a third one. What was the very first one that you mentioned?
Studying your handbook and using that as a reference point.
That works if the institution actually follows its own policies. I've been at some institutions, they follow their policies to the letter, because one of the quickest ways to get in trouble is if you don't follow your own handbook. And there's a lot of institutions that write the handbook and stick it on the shelf. If the institution does follow the handbook, that's a great strategy. And many places that I work, quite frankly, we really shouldn't need anti-bullying policies, because there are mission statements and other things that talk about we're going to have a collegial workplace. We believe in social justice. This is a collaborative and inclusive environment. I mean, we've seen all of those phrases, and people are still being bullied.
My favorite one is we're a family.
Yes, but if you think about families in general, and I'm a family-oriented person, sometimes families are particularly dysfunctional. So
I know.
Yeah, so maybe that's a truer statement. That's a truer statement. I know it's meant to be like, oh, we're all family and we're all here to get along. But if you think about it, that's why you have family practitioners, because there's a lot of things that go on in families that need attention.
Interesting. I appreciate your example. The only thing I probably would not have done, and this is just I guess just the black person in me that just won't allow me to do that. I would not have given that suggestion about, well, if you want to do it, you can file this complaint. I probably wouldn't have said that part. But as far as what you said earlier about, hey, this is not, I look in his employee file, it's supposed to be 5 steps. There's no steps completed. I can't do it according to the policy. I 100% agree with that. And that was a perfect example of what I was alluding to by using the employee handbook as as your constitution.
Right.
So there's like an old phrase that I heard growing up about black people in the labor force, and it's you're the last to get hired and the first to get fired.
Yes.
So this concept about, like I said earlier, about being a family, should black people in the workforce consider, I guess, ourselves as being a part of the family when we join a corporation or take on a position?
Depends. It's more of a people thing. There are some organizations that are all Hispanic or all black or all white or predominantly so, and they still whoop your butt anyway, regardless of you being, unquote, in the same family or not. There are other organizations or other places where your boss looks nothing like you and is the biggest supporter. I was at a lecture about 15 years ago, and I heard a very successful black woman, she was the president of her institution, talking about her mentor, who was a white male, who pushed her to do the right thing and to excel. Now, they didn't look like family, so to speak, but he was her biggest champion. So one of the things I tell even my students, go with the energy and the spirit who is helping you. It may be somebody who looks like you. It may be someone you never thought you'd ever meet in your life. So to answer the question about should black people consider themselves part of the family, it depends if the people in that organization are treating them like peers and colleagues and collaborators, regardless of what those folks look like.
Interesting. So I want to get into a couple of topics that are not necessarily about colorism, but the workplace in general. So social media, you see a lot of different people online saying things that are, I guess, let's just say incorrect, and they end up getting fired. What would your suggestions be to people who are employed and want to keep their job, essentially, what would your social media policy be for people to keep their jobs?
Ideally, I think we all have the right to a freedom of speech. And when I first started working, a couple decades ago, first of all, there wasn't social media. And you could say things that you truly believed in. That pendulum has swung the other direction. I've seen people fired for a single utterance, which I think is unfair. I think that we all say and do things, some of which are representative and some of which are not. But to lose your livelihood over a single utterance, I think is unfair. With that said, since we all know that social media is policed in that manner, perhaps before posting anything, consider, will this cost me my job? Whether it's fair or not is not where I'm coming from. I'm talking about what is. Is it fair? No. But if making that slick remark about, some people make remarks about their students, some people make remarks about politics, some people make remarks about athletes, is that remark so far out of bounds that it'll cost a job? And that is the advice I would give somebody before posting, which goes against that freedom of speech thing we were talking about. But the reality is social media is scrubbed. I mean, nowadays people in the hiring process, they actually go through your Facebook page. They actually go through they actually go through your LinkedIn. They go through everything you've written. So it's not just your resume anymore. It is also the utterances you make in social media that are under a microscope.
So it might be best to not have a social media account, or if you do not have your coworkers as your friends or followers.
Well, even if they're your friends or followers, whether they're your friends or followers or not, they can still see it. You can still see other people's stuff. It just is. So I would just say be prudent. If you don't want that crazy picture of you in Tahiti in a string bikini, you wouldn't put that picture on your desk, maybe you shouldn't put it on Facebook.
I agree.
Yeah. That's
So another thing that is not really talked about too often is company outings and business travel. What would your suggestions be for people to deal with this type of different situation if they've never dealt with it before?
I'll give you the same advice my father gave me. Never drink with your boss.
Hello.
Do not engage in those crazy parties, and not just because you don't want to get caught. Imagine this scenario. You're at a crazy Christmas party, your boss acts the fool, and you witness it. You witness him or her engaged in or throwing up or doing whatever. The next day, the boss remembers you're a witness to his or her bad behavior. And simply because you're a witness, you could be targeted because they don't want that reminder that you know how horrible they acted. So with business travel, and I've done quite a bit of business travel, I do go to the social dinner. So I went to a wonderful conference this past December with some colleagues in the biology department, and they were just wonderful. And I had never socialized with this department, and the dean of the school is from another country, born and raised in another country. and took us to a restaurant that served authentic cuisine from his country. I learned a lot. I learned from him. I learned from the different people around the table. All of us were different nationalities. There was somebody from Persia. There was somebody from Germany. There was somebody from China. There's somebody from Africa. And we were all embraced in this wonderful setting. Now, also, I will say it was the leader, that particular dean, who set the tone and was so very gracious. So I do think when you go on the road, you may not want to go out every night with your colleagues because maybe you have work to do, maybe you need to call your kids, but you should certainly go to one or two of those events. I mean, working relationships are about relationships too. But don't act a fool and don't drink with your colleagues.
I could not agree with you more at all about the not drinking. And when I do business travel 5 days, I give you two. The other days, I'm the king. I'm the king of. I'm a vegan. I gotta work out. I gotta call. Just build that into your understanding of what you're gonna deal with when you get hired at a company, because it's something that you're gonna deal with more than likely.
And that's fair. Yeah.
So the last thing I want to get into is raises. I suspect that most black people in the workforce could stand a raise. So what suggestions do you have for preparing and successfully negotiating raises?
More states have paycheck fairness and transparency laws and rules. So if you're going to a place where you can discover the pay, discover it. If you can find, I know sometimes Glassdoor has salaries. I know sometimes in different states there are databases with salaries. Try to find that out. Also, in negotiating for raises and even in introductory salaries, you should always ask. What is difficult about this is that women are typically socialized to maybe ask once and leave it. Men are socialized, and our society is socialized to believe that, oh, the man has a family, so we should pay him more, but the woman is the trailing spouse. And that's a very sexist and old school way of looking at salaries. So in negotiating, know your worth, know how important it is to you. Don't be shattered if you don't get what you want or only get part of what you want, and know what you are willing to do. It's kind of like if you're in a relationship and you throw an ultimatum to your boyfriend, your girlfriend, what have you, and you don't follow the ultimatum, you kind of look like a punk, right? And that's why I don't believe in ultimatums. But if you're going in there for a raise, already have that talk with yourself about how important it is. Know your value and your worth to the institution. Come in with accolades or achievements that justify that raise and things that you already have in process. And also be aware of what other people have gotten in raises. I mean, in the places that I've worked in, you didn't just get a raise. It was an annual thing. The whole institution got a raise at the same time. In corporate, I would imagine you could go in and ask for a raise, which is fine, but you need to pub yourself. You need to know your worth and also know what your bottom line is. Like, if you don't get the raise, are you leaving? If you get half of the raise, you'll stay. If you don't get the raise, that means you're going to stop working late. If you get the raise, that also means they're going to expect you to work late. I mean, figure out all of those things.
I agree. It sounds like 48 Laws of Power. Enter action with boldness and plan all the way to the end.
Yes.
So for me, just to speak to the listeners, one of my mentors, she's a woman, and she gave me some real good advice. She told me to around review time, make sure that reviews are done on time and that you actually get reviewed, because I know personally, for me, like my first year, I did not get reviewed, and I didn't think about that at all until she discussed it with me, and I found out that I missed out on a raise and a bonus. So, yeah, I had to get that handled. But make sure that you have a quantitative and a qualitative profile of why you should get a raise. So the quantitative side is obviously sales or productivity. That could be measured. Those are things that are black and white. And it shows your worth to the company. The qualitative part about it is journaling. Make sure that you log all the positive reviews and praise that you receive from not only just customers, but your managers and colleagues. So when it comes time to do your annual review, and you see something that doesn't say that you don't have a 10 on your ability to motivate or show leadership in the workplace, you could say, I don't know about that. I have these 15 different examples.
Right.
And you just lay it out in black and white, and it creates a stronger argument for why you deserve a raise. So I have to credit her for giving me that advice, and I would like the listeners to at least consider it when they ask for raises.
I will say also, when I was in a position to grant raises, what I also noticed is along race and gender lines, women tended, and people of color tended to downplay their accomplishments. So I remember. No, I mean, I've seen it. If I have a staff of 15, I would actually. There were a couple I had to sit down and say, "Don't you remember when you did X?" "Oh yeah, I did do that." "Don't you remember when you did Y?" "Oh yeah, I did do that." And so sometimes I think a good leader encourages people to recognize their worth. Now, that's the kind of boss I was when I had a staff. And I also had some people, I mean, if they sneezed, they put it on there. I sneezed and I washed my hands and I did not spread my flu, and I should get a raise for being so conscientious. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's funny. That's funny, especially with the coronavirus right now. Yeah. That's interesting.
So people, some people are really good at putting everything down, and some people forget how wonderful they are.
The quote that I was told was competency builds confidence. And like I said, my first year working, coming out of college, I did not push at all. I was just happy to be there. But after journaling and actually measuring my I guess commitment and ability to basically make the company money, I felt confident in my abilities and what I did. And it wasn't just me saying that; it was me giving countless examples. And that's what I was saying about journaling every day might be a good suggestion for people in the workplace.
Absolutely.
So just to close here, do you have any research or upcoming events you would like to promote?
The coronavirus has shut down all my events. I had 3 in the pipeline, and they are all on hold, and understandably so. What I would say is if you're interested in working with me, I have a website at diversitytrainingconsultants.com. The name of my consulting group is Patricia Berkeley, LLC. I also have a lot of research. Every time I publish, I put my work out there on academia.edu. So if you want to study or look at what I'm doing in my research, that is also publicly available.
Perfect. I'll add those in the description. Do you have any social media you want to promote?
Oh, just my website. That's my calling card, the website, and I update that every couple of weeks. So that is the big one, and there's a contact sheet on there, and that's really where I live at, is on Diversity Training Consultants.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I learned a lot, and I definitely appreciate the conversation today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I think this is a wonderful podcast series, and I am honored to be included.
Perfect, perfect. We'll be in touch. Thank you for reaching out.
Thank you so much. You have enjoy the day and stay healthy.
Yes, you too, please.
Okay, take care.